Well, you came back. That's a good sign. Well, hopefully you did. All right, so we are in part 3 of our series where we are doing custom functions with Power Query. So this final video, we're going to talk about taking our data and converting it into a JSON string object. Now, there have been a couple of times where I have just a bunch of data inside of Excel, and I've sometimes wanted to just, take it, put it in a JSON string, and then just like dump it into a JSON file. Honestly, there's probably easier ways to do it, but it's kind of just one of those things too, where it's kind of just nice to know how to do it in case you're forced to do it. Or if you need to take data that you want to structure that you're going to have to update on a consistent basis, sometimes it might be easier. Or just sometimes, I don't know. There's just been things where I'm like, yeah, I know I can do it with Python, but honestly, I just found like it was just easier to do it here, where if I need to add new data sources, I don't have to like rewrite a bunch of code. I can just take the Power Query that I already have and then just join a table to it and I'm good to go. So ideally, I want it to look something like this. And this, again, this was just simply from one of the repos I was doing. I was trying to, what is it? I was just trying to document something. I was trying to get like a bunch of folders set up, and it just so happened that I said, oh, well, this is nice to know. Do I not have it here? Oh yeah, it's the fields one. Yeah, so this is what it looks like in its raw form, I think. Yeah, so this is what I want it to look like. So I was able to build all this using Power Query, which is kind of neat, sort of. It's not perfect, but it gets you pretty close to what you need. It comes like in this, but then what I was able to do is I was able to do it from here. But again, I'm just going to show it to you. Again, you might use it, you might not use it, but it's kind of a nice little trick to know in case you ever need to do it. So we're going to add a new query like we did in our previous video. And then from here, we're going to do a blank query. I am going to call this convert to JSON. I'm gonna put this right up here. I'm gonna put that right there, and then I'm gonna go into my advanced editor. Again, because it is a custom function, we are gonna have some inputs. The first one is gonna be called resource column. This will be as text. The second argument will be called record table. This will be a table object or table data type. And then just like that, we're good to go. And again, just so you guys can see it, we can now see different information here. So when you make it a table data type, it's kind of neat. It actually will provide you all the tables inside your current environment. Now, something too, I'll just, again, show it to you because it's just nice to know it's there. If you ever do equals and then sections, you will get back a record. But this record contains some very interesting stuff. It will actually contain the data sources that you have, so like your queries and stuff like that, and then also your functions that you have built. So if I go to, I think, section 1, it will return all the tables that I currently have. So this is actually a really nice way where if you want to get certain information, it's pretty nice. I've never personally used this, but the fact that I was able to just kind of know it's there and just see what you could use it with is pretty handy. So again, just a little trick maybe to know when you ever get lost and you need to like reference a specific query, you could actually do it like that. So it's pretty cool. We'll call this the sections query. We'll call it that. But you can see it's different things. So you could even take the results of other ones and then, pass it through or whatever it wants. But it's good to know it's there in case you need it. All right, back to our original function. Again, if you're having a hard time reading it, I encourage you, at least for this video, put it to full screen. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is grab the column names. And so we're going to do a little bit of trickery like we did in the last video and make it a little bit more dynamic than we did before. So this one, I'm going to take that record table that I passed through before, and I'm going to grab the table column names from it. And then I will show you what the output looks like. Okay. And then I'm going to call this one the invoke request function. I'll call this data source, and then I'll say GGG. We'll invoke it. So you can see here that it returns all the column names from our table. So very nice and handy to know. Very nice. Continuing on. From here, filter the column names. So this is a nice little thing to know too. I'm going to call this one table column names we want. This will use list select. So select is a way to filter a list. In this case, the list will be the results of my previous step. So the previous step. And then this is where I do a little bit, again, of some trickery. So I'm going to do a selection as a function. So this is actually kind of like a function that you can use. So I'm going to say each, and then I'm going to do list contains, and then I have some list that I already have pre-set up. So again, just for time's sake, I'm going to make my life a little bit easier. And I'm going to just copy some stuff. Okay. And then value. Okay, perfect. So what are we doing? Let's take a step back and really ask, what are we doing here? Okay, so I know I have a list and I want another list, but I want that list to be filtered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, with my list, select the values from my original list, but I need to set some conditions to filter it. So I'm going to say, okay, for each item in my original list, see if it's in this one. So see if it's in there. That's why I have this little underscore. That's basically denoting for each element in my original list, see if it's in this one. If it is in that one, well, guess what? Keep it. So ideally, we should have a filtered list now of the ones that I want. Huzzah! So it's been filtered. That is a nice, easy way to filter a list. I will tell you again, it is very nice and handy to know how to do that on the fly and not hit your head over the table, because it does take some time. So why are we grabbing all this? Well, ideally what we're going to do is we're going to aggregate our data and we're going to prep it to convert it to a JSON string. So the next thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to aggregate our data. Now, the aggregation process is going to be kind of lengthy, so I'm actually going to define the function that we're going to be using to aggregate, or at least define the logic of how we're going to aggregate as its own separate step, and then I'm going to use the result of that step and pass it through my actual grouping operation. So here, define the function which we will use to group the data, because I want to group my data. So I'm going to call this step group function. It equals basically a list. And then this one is going to be the name of the column. So we're going to say, okay, what is the name of the column after we group? So when we group it, where do we put those results? I'm going to put it in a column called table records. And then I need to define my logic. I need to define my logic. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say table select columns, and we're going to say for each item in my table columns we want. So for each group, select the columns that we want. I think it helps here for just a second to go back to the original data source, because, yeah, I don't care if it's broken. Remember, this one. this one is interesting because what we're doing is we're going to be basically working with a table object, right? So we have our tables, right? So we have our table and we want to select certain columns from each one of those tables. So that's what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be taking each one of those tables and selecting the columns that we want. So that's why I'm doing this step. I'm saying, hey, I don't want every column from that table object. I just want certain ones. And then I actually do a rename operation, but I'm going to hold that for just a second while I write the next one. And then I'm going to say this is actually going to be of the type table, okay? And then also I need to specify each because I'm going to be doing this for each row. A little bit complicated, I know, but just bear with me. It'll make more sense when we see it in action. So group the tables. So I'm going to say resource names equals table group. And then I'm going to say take that record table, the one that we passed through, and then take the resource column, that one that's passed through, and take the group function. So use that as my aggregating, so my function or my list of operations that I need in a sense, right? So this one is a group function, so it's going to take all this stuff. Let's see what this gives us. Again, I know it's going to look a little bit confusing at first, but bear with me. I'm going to fix it up a little bit and I'll show you what we'll be doing. So here, I'm actually going to change this a little bit, and I'm going to call this folder name. Now, remember, we have a folder name. So I'm going to group it on that folder name. So I'm grouping, and then I'm selecting the columns that I want. Because what I'm really doing here is I'm doing a grouping operation. So I'm going to say, okay, take each one of these and group it, but just simply return all the records or rows that belong to that group. So that's basically returning a table inside of it, right? But then what I'm doing is I'm filtering that table, I'm filtering it, so that way I don't select every column, I just want the ones that I care about, or at least my JSON string. So there's actually another step that I do here, but because it's kind of lengthy and it's just simply a rename operation, I am going to copy the code from that, again, just to save some time. Okay. Bum, bum, ba, bum, ba, ba, da, bum, bum. It would be helpful if I didn't make my life a nightmare. Okay, perfect. So this is just simply a renaming operation. It's not doing anything, again, anything fancy. It's just simply renaming the columns. I mean, I guess it's fancy in some people's eyes, but at this point, hopefully that shouldn't be too surprising for people. Oh, that's not the right one. I want this one. Okay, so then from here, what else am I going to do? So I'm going to rename the folder name. And then this one, I'm going to say rename tables equals table, rename columns, resource names, and then list, folder underscore name, and then resource name. Okay, so that's nothing fancy. And then from this one, we are going to define, okay, this is going to be fun. Okay, so this one is, we're kind of using it again as a mechanism to kind of help simplify our process. And so it's going to be another column. So we're going to add another column, and it's only going to select the fields that we want, or select the columns that we want. So this will kind of make more sense again when we see it in action. So add a column with only the records we want. Okay, so from here, record column equals table add column. We're going to say rename tables is our input. Table records select. Then from here, for each row in my table, take the table select columns, take the table records column from my original one, my rename tables one, and then from here, the columns that we want. There's a few, so again, just for time's sake, I'm gonna just copy the code that I already have. And then we'll show the output. Again, sometimes it's just easier to see the output because then that just tells the story better. And then from here, let's take the record column. Record column. Oh, didn't freak out. So this one, interesting. Because it's weird when you see this. Well, you're seeing it again. Maybe I didn't need this step. Maybe this was just unnecessary. Oh, you know what it probably was? I think it, no. I don't know. Well, maybe I have a duplicate set. So I'm sorry in advance. But now you're at least seeing something different, right? So you're seeing how to do it with an add column. You're also seeing how to do it with an aggregation one. There must have been a reason I did it. I guess I'll see in a second. And then from here, we're going to convert the table. Oh, I think it was because I wanted to keep it as a string. Records column to a JSON string. So with this one, convert to JSON equals table select columns. Oh, sorry, not select columns. Add column. I'm going to take my record column step, and then I'm going to say the new name of this column will be called JSON record. Basically, it's a JSON string. And then I'm going to do, again, some magic. I'm going to convert each one of those records into a JSON string. So there's two different ways you need to do this. You need to say text from binary, and then you need to do JSON from value. So JSON from value returns binary. You need to then take that binary and convert it into text. And then we're going to say record column. And then from here, where else is it? And then this will be of type text. Interesting. So this one, I'm just simply taking the values from it, and I'm basically taking the results of this one and converting all of it to a JSON string. So you'll see in a second. I don't know why I put it like this, but at least you're seeing how to convert it to a JSON string. Woo. So now you have your entire JSON string. So that's kind of neat. There's one more thing we have to do. And then this one is basically, I'm just selecting the columns that I want. So keep the columns that we want. Ooh. Keep specified columns equals table, select columns, convert to JSON, and then I need to specify the columns I want to keep. So I want to keep the resource name, and then I want to keep that JSON record column. So I'm basically just going to filter it. And then finally, that should be my output. Done. So now, oh, maybe that's why I did it like that. No, I can't. I think it was stupid the way I did it before. But now, so this is kind of neat. So now you have a table that has, for each of my resource names, a massive JSON record. So let's see what this all looks like inside of Power Query or inside of Excel. Okay. So the first one is we now have this not so large, but large enough data set of just all the different calls that we've made. We then have our little sections one. That's just showing all kind of the neat little stuff. We then have our request. So this was showing the results of invoking in a request and seeing what the output would be. And then we got this little sucker right here, which is basically we've made it where it's a giant massive JSON string. So very neat. And you could actually even, wouldn't necessarily, I would actually not recommend that you put this one into it directly, because you will see right here, it does have a cap link, so it will limit it. So you need to be careful when you return strings from Power Query, because they will be cut off at a certain point, and then you will not have valid JSON. You'll dump it into Visual Studio Code like I did, and then you'll be like, why is it not formatting or anything? And then it's like, oh, because it's not syntactically correct. But with that being said, that actually was the final video in this series. So again, not necessarily any specific reason of maybe why you would want to do this, but it's showing you how to work with different types of data sources, different types of functions, using custom functions along with your original queries to basically create these nice, easy tools to do bulk operations or dynamic operations to make your life easier. And ideally with this, you can now do things like make API calls, know how to work comfortably with the JSON data that is sent back to you, and then in some cases use the result of those JSON records and use them as a input for another function that can get the remaining results, for example. So very interesting stuff. Hopefully you learned a trick or two. I know I did. I actually was very impressed by this little section one. I didn't know about that one. But I just think personally, it's kind of nice to know that you can do this with certain APIs where I'm like, oh, this is like 10 times easier. But if you have any final questions, by all means, put them down in the comments below. And then in our next video, we're actually going to jump into VBA again. And we're going to talk about using the GitHub API to basically export our VBA modules into GitHub, our repo. So thank you again for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video.